All right, covalent compounds. It's time to name and write formulas for these. These ones I think are easy peasy, kind of fun. All right, so first, what happens to valence electrons in a covalent bond? Remember, those electrons are shared. So the valence electrons in covalent bonds are shared. We can have two non-metal atoms that create the covalent bond. So in covalent bonds, the electrons are shared between two non-metal atoms. Covalent compounds are also called molecular compounds or just molecules. Remember, we could have polar and nonpolar, but for naming, that doesn't matter. So you're given a sheet like this, okay? So let's look at the example. So CCl4, I have to name it. So is there a metal? No, there is not. Carbon and chlorine are both nonmetals, so it's covalent. So now I know it's covalent. Is it an acid? Meaning, does it start with an H? Nope. So I have to use the prefixes to name it. So the first element, I use the name of the element and a prefix. If there's only one atom of the first element, then I don't use a prefix. So I just call it carbon. Why? If you look after the C, there's no subscript. That means there's one. So I just call it carbon. Then I move on to the second element. And for the second element, I add a prefix and then "ide" to the end. And it doesn't matter this time if there's one, I still add a prefix. So tetra is the prefix for 4, and that's chlorine, but it becomes chloride. So then I combine the names, so it's carbon tetrachloride. Let's look at this one. So is there a metal? No. Phosphorus and oxygen are both nonmetals. That means it's covalent. Since it's covalent, does it start with an H? So is it an acid? No. So we use prefixes to name it. So look at the first element. Look at the subscript. It's 2. So I have to use the name of the first element and a prefix. Since it's 2, it's di. So I say diphosphorus, just the name of the element. For the second element, I have to add a prefix and IDE to the end. So pentoxide. Now I don't say pentaoxide because that's just a little awkward. So we just say pentoxide. So then we put it all together. So diphosphorus, 2 phosphorus, pentoxide, 5 oxygen. Okay, next example, S2Cl2. So is there a metal? No. Sulfur and chlorine are both nonmetals, so it's covalent. Since it's covalent, does it start with an H? Is it an acid? No. So we use prefixes to name it. So the first element, we're going to use a prefix. First element, sulfur, 2 of them, disulfur. Look at the second element. How many? 2. But we don't say chlorine. Remember, the second element, we change the ending, so dichloride. So combine the names. We have disulfur, 2 sulfur, dichloride, 2 chlorines. All right, now let's write formulas. So taking the name and writing a formula. So example 1, nitrogen monoxide. Do you see prefixes? Yes, I do. It's covalent. So look at the prefix for the first element. Oh, well, I don't have a prefix for the first element. So that means there was one of them, because remember, we don't use mono for the first element. So we use that as a subscript. So just N1, but we don't write the 1, so just N. Now look at the second element. Look at the prefix. Well, I see mono, and mono means 1. So I use that as a subscript for oxide, oxygen, but again, we don't write the 1. And then we combine it together. So NO, nitrogen monoxide. So dinitrogen tetraoxide. So do you see prefixes? Yes, I do. So it's covalent. Look at the prefix for the first element, di. Di means 2. So use that as a subscript. So I have 2 nitrogens. Look at the prefix for the second element. Tetra means 4. Use that as a subscript. So 4 oxygens, and put it all together. Now, do not reduce. Remember when we did ionic, we had to do all that reducing? Do not. This literally tells you, put 2 nitrogens, put 4 oxygens. So no reducing in this one. I know it can be a little bit confusing, but don't do it. Nitrogen trihydride. So do we see prefixes? Yes, I do. So it's covalent. Look at the prefix for the first element. Well, there isn't one. So that means there's one of them, because for the first element only, we don't use mono. So N1, but we don't write the 1, so just N. Look at the prefix for the second element, tri. Tri means 3, so we have 3 as the subscript for the next element. So hydride, what is that? It's hydrogen, so NH3 when we put it all together. 1 nitrogen, 3 hydrogen, nitrogen trihydride. And we're going to do a lot more practice with it. I hope you learned a little bit about covalent compounds and how we name them and write formulas.